When I walked in, there was a glow on the bathroom carpet, a reflection of the sunlight that was just beginning to shine through the blinds. It wasn't blinding, it just caught my eye. I lowered my eyes to see what was there. I was barefoot and didn't want to step on the glass or anything. Caroline hadn't said she'd dropped anything in the bathroom, but who knew? And I didn't pay attention to it at first, since without the light it was almost the same color as the carpet, but eventually I found it. A tiny circle of foil had fallen to the floor and was reflecting the light that fell in my eyes as I entered the bathroom. I picked it up. It was a pill liner, the little circle of foil that squeezes out when you pull a pill out of the strip. Most of the time it stays attached to the strip, but sometimes, as in this case, it detaches and falls to the floor. I examined it. It was empty on one side, but there was a mark on the other side. 2. Since it was Wednesday, I figured that meant Tuesday, yesterday's pill. That meant the pill had to be taken daily. I knew I wasn't on any medication. I was 35 and healthy as a flea, as was my wife, Caroline. We had both recently had our annual checkups and were deemed fit and trim, so why was there a pill cap lying in my bathroom? I knew there were many pills that needed to be taken daily, but one that immediately caught my eye was the birth control pill. Caroline didn't take birth control pills, or at least I thought she didn't, since I had a vasectomy 2 years ago after the birth of our second and last child. She had no problems with cramping or period pain. She was one of those lucky women who got her period without any problems. So why the pill? Admittedly, my first thought was that she might have some disease she didn't want to tell me about. For a few minutes, my thoughts went to very dark places, but I remembered again about the physical exam and the reports we showed each other. We were both clean. If the little circle of foil was here, the pills were probably here too. I closed and locked the door, Caroline still in bed, and started looking. It took me a while to find them, but eventually I did. They were buried at the bottom of the tampon box, in the aspirin box. When I pulled out the strip of pills, I immediately recognized them as the ones she had been taking before I did the circumcision, and even before, between our kids, before we tried. Why had she started taking the pills again? I had only one answer to that question. She was having sex with someone who could get her pregnant. She was cheating on me. Caroline and I had been together for 9 years. I had just graduated from university and was studying to be an engineer, and she was working as a receptionist. We met at a bar, and although we didn't hit it off right away, she showed enough interest to accept my invitation to dinner. Caroline was tall, only an inch shorter than my 5 feet 10 inches. She was a former athlete and retained her athletic build, slender figure, and small breasts. We courted for about a year and then married when I was 26. Our children were 5 and 2, and I had surgery to prevent further accidents. 2 was our limit. We had the perfect set. First James and then Sonia. I had the perfect family, or so it seemed to me. Caroline had gone back to work, taking maternity leave for each of the children, and didn't want to leave a job she loved. We had an au pair who came to look after the children during the day and went home in the evening. She cost almost as much as Caroline earned, but Caroline didn't care. She just wanted to get out of the house and work at a job she loved. I worked with a couple of buddies, starting an engineering firm with them. We'd never get rich, but we were all very comfortable. I cleaned up the bathroom, put her pills back where they belonged, and decided I needed to think. There was no point in getting into a confrontation with her right now. I needed a plan. I needed proof. What would happen after that? I had no idea. Let's gather all the facts first, and then we'll see where it takes us. I went to work as usual and began to think through my options. First, I wanted to know who and when. Also, for how long. Was it someone at work, God forbid, her boss? Could it have been someone she had been in contact with since we met? This led me to the next horrible question. Were these children even mine? All this time, I hadn't let my emotions interfere with what was happening. I knew it would happen, that I would feel loss, betrayal, hurt, and anger. But first, I needed to figure out if it was real. I was working on the problem, and I didn't have enough facts yet to draw any conclusions. I got on the internet. First, I needed DNA testing kits. To test the kids would be child's play. I often put them to bed before Caroline arrived, so it could be done easily. I also ordered surveillance equipment. A couple of small voice recorders I could hide in her car and bag, and a few tiny cameras I would hide around the house. I doubted she was doing it there, given that she had an assistant and that she was rarely there when I wasn't. At least I didn't think so. I needed access to her phone. I knew of a cloning tool that could be used to get a copy of her phone, get all her messages and emails, and even listen to her calls. To do this, I needed to buy another phone. It took a few days for delivery. All the while, I watched carefully. Caroline wasn't doing anything out of the ordinary. Our sex life was pretty standard, once or twice a week, usually on weekends when we both went to bed late. I never smelled a suspicious odor from her, and she didn't dive into the shower as soon as she got home. Nothing's changed. So either she wasn't having an affair, or she was exceptionally cautious, or she'd been having an affair for so long that it had become second nature. Friday morning, the packages arrived. I had them sent to my office so there would be no questions. I had DNA test kits, voice recorders, several cameras, a cell phone, and a cloning kit. I was ready to get to work. I left the office early that day. When I got home, the au pair was feeding the kids dinner and getting them ready for bed. I left her alone and went and hid the cameras. One in the bathroom, one in the living room, and one in the bedroom with a good view of the bed. I heard the kids splashing around in the bathroom and went to help them get ready for bed. I took Sonia and left the au pair with James. I swabbed Sonia's cheek and put it in my pocket. Then I laid her down and read to her until she dozed off. When I peeked into the room, James was still awake and the au pair was still reading to him. I offered to fill in for her and let her go home, and she gratefully agreed. It didn't take long to take the swabs, and in less than 20 minutes, he was sound asleep too. I packed the swabs along with the swab taken from my own cheek and put them in the mailbox. The letter carrier was to pick them up in the morning. The service promised that the results would be available online within 48 business hours. So last Wednesday, Caroline got home on time and we went about our usual business. She told me about her day and I told her about mine, with neither of them listening to the other. We had dinner, and then she took a shower. I took this opportunity to install voice recorders in her car and bag and clone her cell phone. I checked the clone for any incriminating messages or emails, but there were none. Either she was being very careful or she wasn't cheating. I couldn't make up my mind. The weekend went as usual. We had sex in the morning while the kids were still awake. It became almost a ritual, almost even a routine. If we managed to get it done before one or the other kid woke up, we considered it a victory. The hit rate was about 50. Since she was always first, she almost always won. She didn't call or text on weekends, and since we spent all our time together, I had no way of checking to see if she was on the pill, although I did check the strip and the corresponding days were off. Since it was just her and I in the house at the weekend and I wasn't on the pill, I made a fair assumption that she was on it. On Monday, I told her I would be working from home. She left for the office, and I took the opportunity to pull thumb drives from all the cameras and check them. The bathroom camera confirmed that she had indeed taken the pills, but the real surprise was the bedroom camera. Saturday night, while I was making dinner, she went to take a shower. In the bedroom, I saw her using her phone to text someone. There was nothing on the phone I cloned, which meant she must have a second phone. It definitely wasn't in her bag, so where was it? I watched what she did with the phone when she was done texting. She walked over to the air duct, released the latch, and opened it, hiding the phone inside. I immediately went and checked the air duct and found the phone was not there. She was supposed to hide it there when she was home, but she takes it with her when she leaves. I needed access to that phone. It was the first concrete evidence that she was up to something, though I still didn't know what. There were signs that she was cheating, but it wasn't definite. I watched the footage of her getting dressed that morning and saw her take her phone off the air conditioner and put it in her bag before she left for the day. I needed that phone. In the evening, when she got home, I watched her closely. She carelessly tossed her bag in the hallway and continued with her usual evening routine. After dinner, she went to take a shower and I looked in her bag. Her cell phone wasn't there. She must have taken it with her and hidden it in the air conditioning unit when she went upstairs. She didn't know, or didn't care, that on the other side of the vent was Sonia's room. Quietly, listening to the noise of the shower, I crept into my daughter's bedroom and opened the window on her side. There was a cell phone lying there. I grabbed it and carried it into my office, cloning it into a new phone in a couple minutes. I got it back and was about to close the window when I heard my wife come out of the shower. I walked over and sat down by Sonia's bed, stroking her hair as my wife walked in. "Is something wrong?" she asked quietly. I shook my head. I like to come and sit with one or the other of them from time to time, I whispered, just to remind myself how lucky I am to have two such wonderful children. She smiled. You old geezer, she said. Let's go before you wake her up. I couldn't look at the clone phone until the next day. And that's when my world came crashing down. The intercom sound from my secretary didn't penetrate as I sat in my office chair staring at the clone phone, tears streaming down my face. Eventually, she apparently got tired of trying and knocked briefly before entering my office. She poked her head out from behind the door and saw me. Michelle, my secretary, was a non-serious woman who dressed much older than her years. I would give her somewhere between 30 and 40. She was slim, with red hair and green eyes. She always dressed conservatively in clothes that would be inappropriate on someone much older. Our relationship was always 100% professional. I never even raised an eyebrow in her direction, though I'd seen the result when someone did. It wasn't a nice thing to do. I had to talk to one of my business partners who was known as the office Lothario. He was flirting with her because he couldn't bear the thought of a woman who wouldn't succumb to his charms. She bluntly told me that if he didn't quit, she would sue the company not only for constructive discharge, but also for sexual harassment. She told me that the only reason she hadn't already done so was because I had always treated her with respect and had never done anything I shouldn't have done. Never! My business partner was furious and wanted to fire her immediately. He gave us an ultimatum. Either she quit or he did. That's how I came to own 60% of the company, instead of the 40% I started with. I was one partner short. When Michelle saw me, she immediately withdrew, obviously to deal with whatever it was she was trying to tell me. I heard voices in my far office and then everything went quiet. Michelle went back into my office, closed and locked the door. Then she walked over, pulled back a chair on the other side of my desk and sat down across from me a few feet away. She pulled out some napkins from where women always have a supply and held them out to me. I took them blindly and started wiping my eyes. Tell me. That was all she said. I showed her my phone. There were text messages from Caroline and back. The other party wasn't named. There were no names, but they talked about secret meetings and sex that seemed to go on forever. Whoever it was knew her well. Talked about things only I should have known. The small mole on the inside of her thigh. Other details that only a lover could know. And not just a casual lover. A long-term lover. I wasn't mentioned once in any of the texts. It was as if I didn't exist. There was no he disagreed, or he said or did this and that. I just wasn't there. It wasn't even mentioned. Do you know who? She asked, still as businesslike as ever. I shook my head. How do you know? She asked. I told her about finding the little silver bookmark on the bathroom floor and then about the pills. The storytelling just poured out in a river. The whole time I was telling, she just sat there and looked at me. After a while, I realized she was holding my hand. This was the first time, I thought, that we had actually made contact. You need more information, she said. The children's DNA will be obtained on Wednesday. Will you be able to hold out until then? I don't know, I said. She nodded. Our producers in Portland need to meet with you right away, she said. I've booked you on the next flight. You'll be back on Thursday. I can't think about that right now, I said. You tell Caroline that, she said. She took my phone, dialed a text message, and sent it to Caroline. Yeah, no, there's been a mix-up in Portland, so I have to go deal with it. I'll be back on Thursday. Love you. The reply followed almost instantly. Okay, let me know you made it. I'll see you when you get back. She stared at the phone for a second, pursing her lips, then handed me back the receiver and pulled out her own. Lorraine, she said. Michelle? Yes, thank you. Are you free this afternoon anytime? Great, I'll see you then. Go and get cleaned up, she told me in a businesslike tone of voice. The tone of voice and the fact that in the office she had accustomed me to doing exactly what she said meant that I was doing exactly that. In fact, it was even nice not to have to think, to defer decisions and plans to someone else. When I came out of the bathroom, she was holding my jacket in her hands. Where are we going? I asked. You have an appointment with an old friend of mine, she said. I just went. As it turned out, Lorraine was Michelle's best friend and divorce attorney. She was apparently handling Michelle's divorce when she caught her husband having an affair with one of his female co-workers. Michelle was explaining the situation to Lorraine, and I watched the scene almost in a daze. This wasn't happening to me. Lorraine had obviously seen this happen many times in her career. After learning as many facts as we had, she turned her attention to me. Gary, she said. It wasn't me. She was talking to someone else. I felt a burning sensation in my cheek. Michelle slapped my face. I was shocked and came to my senses. I saw shock and amusement in Lorraine's eyes, but they quickly disappeared when she looked at me. Gary? She asked. I nodded. Do you have any idea what you want to do with him? My engineering brain woke up to this. Plans, that's what it was good for. Kill them both, I said. I expected at least a shocked exclamation from Michelle, but surprisingly, she only grinned. Okay, Lorraine said. I understand that, but unfortunately, it's not an option. You see, it's against the law. However, we do have some legal options. Why don't we discuss them? Before I begin, she said, I'm just offering you options. I'm not in favor of any of them yet. That can come later. The first option is to do nothing. She doesn't know that you know, but from what I understand, you've had quite a happy life before, and that shouldn't change. Keep it up. Play ignorance. Second, amicable divorce. File irreconcilable differences, split the company, house, 401k. She makes less than you, so you'll probably have to pay child support for her for a few years at least, and for the kids until they graduate high school. Third, blow up. File for adultery. If the kids aren't yours, sue for falsely filling out a birth certificate. Sue the other person for alienation of affection. If they are the father, sue to get back all the money you spent on the kids. If it's a coworker, sue for not following fraternity rules. Almost every company has such a policy these days. If the other party is married, give her partner all the information about the affair. If they know, we may have a case against them as well. If they don't know, I can represent them in the divorce. Make it public. Tell everyone. Friends, family, coworkers. If she is in any societies or church groups, tell them too. Humiliate her as much as you can. We need to protect your assets. Sell your stake in the company to an offshore trust. Mortgage the house. Take all the equity you can out of it. Take the cash along with the money you got from the company. Cash out your 401k and have fun in Vegas. My head was spinning. I knew immediately what she was talking about. The first option was no good. I wasn't anyone's willing cuckold. I'd been gutless and unconscious for too long. Option 2? Not a chance. I'd spent too much time building a business and creating the lifestyle we had. She could forget about taking half of everything I had and continue to support me while she had fun with someone else. Third option, I said. Nuclear. Lorraine smiled. Okay, I'll start gathering documents. I'd suggest we start covert surveillance on your wife and try to figure out who, when, and where. We really need more evidence. Can I keep this cell phone? You can see you don't need it. I nodded and handed her the phone. Michelle and I walked out of Lorraine's office and she drove me to a small, family-run hotel. She booked me a room. Go take a shower and bring food to the room, she said. She took full charge. I will contact you later. I acted mechanically. My whole world was crumbling, and I sat in my hotel room and ordered room service food as if I was on an outing. It was the only way I could deal with the stress of what was happening. 9 years on the toilet. But the most frustrating part was that I was completely oblivious to it. How could I not notice what she was doing? Who was it? Was it the boss she went back to after each child was born? She had told me she liked the work and independence, but was that the real reason, or was she just unable to be away from her lover for so long? I looked speculatively at the minibar and was about to give up when Michelle walked into the room. Don't even think about it, she said. I need you to think, not drown your sorrows. You need to plan, and you can't do that if you're looking at the world through the bottom of a bottle. Plan? I asked sullenly. I tried to do that. I had a plan, and it was a good one. I had a loving wife and 2 gorgeous kids, and now look where I am. My wife is a whore, and I don't even know if those 2 kids belong to me. I'm the world's biggest cuckold. My whole life is ruined, and you want me to make plans? She stared at me for a few moments. I waited for her to say something, maybe sympathize with me, maybe even hug me. Then she looked at her watch. Okay, she said businesslike. The pity party is over. How many times when we started the company did you run into obstacles, your plans thwarted? What does that have to do with… What? She insisted. I don't know, I said. A whole bunch. There was the time the patent office lost a patent application for an inversion thread, and we won that deal with Headingley's. There was a time when a bank tried to foreclose on us early because they were under pressure. There was a time... Okay, she said. At what point in all these cases did you sit down, put your head on your hands, and give up? It was different, I said. Why? She asked. What was different in those days? I had something to fight for then, I said. I had a family that depended on me. I had... Now you have a family, she said, that is equally dependent on you, and it's much bigger than the one you have at home. 141 people and their families depend on you to pull this off. None of your partners can keep the company afloat. You're all engineers, but of the three of you, you're the only businessman. If you fail, so will the company. You think that bitch cares about the families that depend on your company? If she gets half of it, she'll sell it to the highest bidder, and you'll lose control of the business. You know who will buy, and then the headlings will own everything you've worked for. Is that what you want? I stared at her. She was right. I had worked too long and hard to give everything to whoever would give that whore wife more money. I needed to get things in order to secure a future for myself and my family. If the kids were mine, I would take care of them. But as for Caroline, she made her own bed and could sleep in it with whoever she wanted. I could grieve over that relationship when I was sure everything else was in order. My despondency dissipated, and driven by anger and determination, I sat down at the table with Michelle and began to make plans. I was going to secure the future of the company and take care of the only family I had left. Once I made that decision, everything fell into place. The pain was gone. The hesitation was gone. I had no doubts left. Michelle noticed the look on my face change and nodded, satisfied. That's exactly the kind of Gary I need right now, she said. Someone who knows how to plan for the future. We spent the rest of the evening making plans on how to secure the future of the company. At first, I advocated selling my shares to the partners, but Michelle rejected the idea. She felt that I couldn't trust them to run the company and leave it in my hands when they became majority shareholders. They would have crumbled it to the ground. I needed to retain control. Eventually, we decided that we could set up an offshore trust to which I would sell the company at market value. That same trust would leave me as CEO at the minimum wage. I would make virtually nothing. Because the trust was offshore, the courts would have no jurisdiction over its records, so the owners of the trust would not be known. Now I was a millionaire, at least on paper, or would be when it was over. I needed to get rid of all that capital. I also needed to cash out my 401k and release all the equity in the house. Although we were together when we bought the house, it was in my name only. As Caroline was not working at the time of the purchase, she was in James's business, and the mortgage counselor told us it would be easier to put the loan in my name since she wasn't making any money at the time. I made a list of things I needed to do and emailed my solicitor, who dealt with the legal affairs of the company, to arrange an appointment for the next day. After Michelle left, I showered and went to bed, not counting on a long nap. I passed out almost as soon as my head touched the pillow and stayed awake until the alarm on my phone woke me up the next day. There was a message on my phone from Caroline. You didn't tell me you were coming over. Is everything okay? Sorry, I was planning on staying late, but then I fell asleep. Things are looking up now. I should be back Thursday. Okay, I'll see you later. Love you. Kex. I didn't reply to this message. I just couldn't bring myself to type those words. Michelle knocked on my door a little after 8. I showered again and contemplated heading out for breakfast. Breakfast, she said, indicating that I should follow her. We walked into the diner on the next street over and sat in a booth eating pancakes and bacon with maple syrup. Part of me couldn't understand why I was acting this way. It was as if my world hadn't collapsed and my heart hadn't burst. I reasoned that at some point when the dust settled, it would all come crashing down on me. I wasn't looking forward to it, but for now I had a job to do. Brian Spencer, Michelle said, giving me the name of my lawyer, called and said he had some free time at 10 to meet with us. We can go to your bank and cash out your 401k first, and before that, we can release the equity in your house. I realize it's worth consolidating the money, I said, but there will still be a record that I had it all. Can't the court just order me to pay her half? Only if you still have them. Michelle grinned. That's where Vegas comes in handy. Once you have all that capital, you'll go to Vegas for a week and blow it all away. All before you file for divorce. That way, when the court assesses your estate, you'll be broke. In debt, in fact. The bank will foreclose on your house, and your paycheck will be barely enough to live on. And that's assuming the kids aren't yours. If they are, you'll just put all your 401k money in trust so they can go to college. Caroline won't be able to touch it. Technically, she'll be making more money than you. She may be able to afford a house on her own, and she may even end up having to pay you alimony. When will you get the DNA results? The company said the results should be online sometime today, I said, picking up my phone. I checked the email the company had sent me. There was a link, which I clicked on. I watched the page load, but then put the phone down. I wasn't sure I was ready to see the results yet. May I? Michelle asked, and I pushed the phone towards her. She took it and looked at the screen, scrolling up a few times. I watched her face, looking for clues, trying to anticipate from her expression what she might say. She looked up from the phone. The results aren't in yet, she said. According to the tracking data, they should be available in the next 12 hours. I exhaled without even realizing it. Let's go, she said, standing up. The bank should be open by now. Clearing the house of equity and cashing out the 401k took surprisingly little time. I closed all of our savings accounts, including the kids' college funds, and transferred the money to an account in my name only. The only account I left alone was a joint account that we used daily. That account still had less than $10,000 in it. My lawyer stuck a huge oar in our plans, but if it could be done nicely, he did it. You're forgetting one thing, he said when we laid out our plan to him. You have a prenup. Really? I asked, surprised. I had no idea. What? It was a condition of the partnership agreement when you started out, he reminded me. All partners had to sign a prenuptial agreement that protects the company if the relationship breaks down. It only protects the company, but she has no claim to any of its assets. For divorce purposes, you are an employee of the company, so at best she can claim your salary and 401k. That's about it. I would suggest, he said, and I don't mean anything bad about your divorce attorney's plan, that you use all the equity you freed up from the house and 401k and invest it in the company. Buy out one of your partners. I know Robert has been hinting that he wants to invest. You don't have enough money to do that, but you can take a loan from the company pension fund to make up the difference. The payments will come out of your paycheck, which means your income will be much lower when you value the assets. And since everything else will be tied up in the company, it can't be touched. Your credit rating will suffer when the bank forecloses on your house and you will lose half of what's left in your bank. But other than that, it will gain nothing. We can make your paycheck less than hers, so she'll even end up paying you alimony. What am I going to live on, I asked, if my entire paycheck goes to loan payments? I'll still need somewhere to live and eat, not to mention I have 2 more kids. I paused. At least I think. Let's wait with the kids, he said. You've already decided what you're going to do if they're not yours. Will you still be involved in their lives? I don't know, I said. It's too horrible a thought to consider. I'll have to wait until I know for sure before I make that decision. Don't forget the other parts of your lawyer plans, he reminded me. I'm willing to bet you'll get enough from the lawsuit against her company to pay off the loan and get back to getting a full paycheck when this is over. Not to mention you'll be able to claim back expenses from the kid's father if it turns out they're not yours. Since that will happen after the divorce, it won't be considered part of the settlement agreement. Could you contact Robert and see if he's interested in selling? I asked. I'm not sure I'm capable of doing that at this time. He nodded. I'll give him a call, and then I'll let you know. We shook hands and walked out of his office. I was relieved as we walked out of the building. The plans were beginning to materialize, which always made me feel a deep sense of satisfaction. Then I remembered why we had made the plans. The relief disappeared, and I felt an emptiness in my chest. We were sitting at the diner eating lunch when I dared to look at my phone again. Once again, I couldn't bring myself to do more than click the link in the email before handing the phone to Michelle. I watched her face again, waiting for the reaction that was going to tell me whether or not I had become a father. I'm sorry, Gary, she said quietly. It was the least businesslike phrase I'd ever seen. She handed me the phone and I read the results myself. Neither child was biologically mine, even though they had the same father. It just wasn't me. The double blow of losing both children was more than offset by the rage I felt over the betrayal. Not only had she passed both children off as mine, But she had convinced me to have a vasectomy, which meant that I would now be unable to have children of my own. Gary, Michelle shouted, bringing me to my senses. This isn't the time or place. Just stay calm. We'll get through this, I promise. I took a few deep breaths, suppressing my anger. I really wanted to do some serious physical damage to someone. I even considered hiring a hitman and killing the bastard who gave birth to the children that were supposed to be mine. Michelle picked herself up again and led me out of the diner. Lorraine called, she said. She wants to see you. We headed for Lorraine's office. Plus, 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 plus. When we entered her office, Lorraine looked grim. I have the preliminary report from the private investigator, she said. Apparently, Caroline hasn't wasted any time. A man came to your house last night and stayed the night. We weren't able to look inside. I have cameras installed in my house, I said. I can tamper with the thumb drives and we can see what happened. Okay, she said. Go do it now, and then we can work out a plan. I assume the information on those discs will be important. The au pair will be there, I said. I can't go back. I'll have to leave town on business. Lorraine checked her cell phone. The au pair is at the play center with Sophie and James right now, she said. I'll keep an eye on her and let you know if she leaves. My house was about a 30-minute drive from Lorraine's office, and Michelle drove quickly. We got there without incident, and I swapped out the flash drives. I took a quick look around the house, but didn't notice anything objectionable. Then we went back to Lorraine's office. We checked the flash drives. I decided not to look at the one in the bedroom. I didn't need to see what was going on there. I recognized the man as soon as he walked through the door. As I'd suspected, it was her boss, the man she'd worked for the entire time we'd been together, Bill Wainwright. I was almost stunned by what happened when he pulled up to the house. First of all, he had his own key, and he let himself in. As he approached, James looked up and saw him. "Papa Bill!" he exclaimed and ran to hug him. This got me so excited. I broke down and started sobbing. I couldn't watch any longer. Lorraine watched me sobbing. Michelle, for the first time in her life, put her arms around me and cuddled up to me while I cried. It took a while, but eventually I pulled myself together. Do you want to get some rest? Lorraine asked, and I shook my head. The pain had receded a little, but the anger was starting to overpower me again. What's next? I asked. I already have a copy of the terms of employment at your wife's firm. They have a no fraternization clause in them, so you have a case against the company for violating it. Since the person your wife is fraternizing with is a senior manager at the firm, there's no way the company can claim it didn't know what was going on. And then we explained to Lorraine what the company lawyer had told me and what he had advised. She broke out into a huge grin. She picked up the phone and called him, asking for copies of the prenup, and he emailed them to her. Everything is just perfect, she said as she read the prenup. Put aside everything I said before. Your boy's plan is perfectly reasonable. If your partner wants to get rid of the company, buy him out. Put everything you have into the company, and it will cease operations immediately. We can sue her company for default, him for alienation of affection, her for making a false statement on the birth certificate, and both of them for the money spent on the children so far. The deduction for medical bills alone for the birth is an impressive amount. It all depends on whether Robert wants to sell out, I said. I guess we'll have to wait until he comes back with an answer. No. Michelle drove me back to the hotel and I went up to my room. I was about to sit on the bed when there was a knock on the door. I opened it and saw her standing in the hallway. Let's go, she said. You can't stay here. What? I asked. Why? Because you don't need to be alone, she said. You'll only be pondering or attacking the minibar. I want you where I can keep an eye on you. As she spoke, she gathered my things. Taking my hand, she led me out of the room, then looked me over and led me to her car. Where are we going? I asked, finding that I didn't care anymore. To my house, she said. I have a spare room you can use. But, I started. She turned her head and looked at me. I fell silent. I had never been to Michelle's house and was surprised to see that it was almost the same size as mine. Our house was 2 stories and hers was 1 story. She led me into a room with a bathroom. Take a shower and change your clothes, she instructed. Dinner in 30 minutes. We ate our dinner in silence, and it must have been delicious, but I didn't feel it. My mind was preoccupied with a whirlwind of thoughts that had no way of settling. I was furious, but I couldn't find the strength to express it. I was devastated, but I couldn't find the strength to care. All I had energy for right now was to carry out my plans. I was on autopilot, my destination was set. I was just contemplating what to do after dinner when the phone rang. I flinched, hoping it wasn't Caroline. But it wasn't Caroline. "Hello, Robert," I said languidly. "Why?" was all he asked. Robert and I had been friends since university. We'd studied together, and it was our project work together that gave us the foundation for the business. At first, most of the company went to me because I had more capital to invest than he did. "Caroline is cheating on me," I said in a wooden voice, "and has been cheating this whole time." "All this time?" he asked incredulously. "You mean—" "None of the kids are mine," I told him. There was silence on the other end of the phone. "Nah, so you want to tie up all your assets with the company and cover yourself with a prenup?" he asked. Either Brian Spencer, our attorney, had explained it all, or he understood the partnership agreement much better than I did. "I want to keep the 5%, he said, "and stay on staff as a consulting engineer. I'll discuss the details with human resources. The rest is yours." "Okay," I said. "I'll have Brian handle the paperwork." "Gary?" he said after a moment. "I'm really sorry about that. I know it doesn't feel like it right now, but it'll get easier later, I promise. I've been almost where you are now, and it does get easier." It was only then that I remembered that he had gotten divorced about 4 years ago. I didn't know the details because even though we were friends, he was a very private person. I just knew it was uncomfortable, and then he brought up the prenup. He used it himself. The next morning, Michelle woke me up with a cup of coffee. "Let's go," she said. "We've got a lot to do." The first thing we did was contact Brian Spencer, the company lawyer. He had already prepared all the paperwork for my buyout from Robert, and we had the whole deal finalized in less than 30 minutes. I gave him everything I had taken from the house, my savings, and my 401k. I had to take out a loan against the company retirement plan for the remainder. Now, at least on paper, my debt was about $1 million. My paycheck was cut almost in half because the payouts were deducted before taxes. Then we drove to Lorraine's house. I showed her all the transaction paperwork and she was thrilled. "Everything is in order," she said. "I'll file the paperwork today and we can file it on Monday if you want. We'll file for him, her, and the company at the same time." "Where do you want her to file?" "Wherever she'll be most uncomfortable," I said. "If you could do it through a billboard at the Super Bowl, I'd gladly pay for it." Lorraine laughed. "We'll hand her the papers in her office," she said. "Monday at 10 in the morning. If the papers don't get to court before then. If I file them today, I'll have them tomorrow afternoon." I nodded. "So now what?" I looked at Michelle. She was running things. "So," she said, "we have 2 more stops before you go back to the office and pretend you just got back from fighting a fire in Portland. Do you think you can make it home before Monday?" "I guess I'll have to," I said. "Don't guess," she said. "Tell me what you need to get through this moment." "I don't know," I said. "Any good news?" She smiled at me. "Then let's go," she said. I was surprised when we pulled up outside the medical center, where I'd had all the tests and where I'd had the procedure that meant I would now never be a father. "What are we doing here?" I asked. "You wanted good news?" she said. "Let's go." I followed her into the clinic and stood aside as she approached the front desk. The receptionist nodded and indicated that we should sit down. We sat down. Less than 2 minutes later, my doctor came out and invited me into the consultation room. I looked at Michelle, who made no move to follow me. "Please?" I said, and she nodded, seeing me off. Dr. Harrington didn't comment in any way on the receptionist's involvement in my consultation. He knew who she was and that she was not my wife since he was the doctor for both Caroline and me. Why I asked my secretary to come with me was my business, not his. "Gary," he said, "I understand you wanted to ask about the vasectomy reversal." My eyes widened. I wondered if it was even possible. I looked at Michelle. A tiny smile appeared on her face. "Yes, is it possible?" "Of course," Dr. Harrington said. "Since your vasectomy was done less than 3 years ago, the success rate for sex reversal surgery is about 95%. The surgery is a little longer than the original surgery and requires general anesthesia, but I'm confident you'll be able to father children again as soon as we're done." Once again, my eyes filled with tears. I still had a chance to be a father. It would require surgery, but it was a small price to pay for being able to have children of my own. I had no idea who I would have children with, but at least the possibility was there. I know it's not an easy thing to accept, the doctor said. Here's some information about the surgery and its cost. Unfortunately, it will not be covered by your insurance. If you'd like to proceed, let me know and we can schedule you for an evaluation. Thank you, doctor, Michelle said as she stood up and took the information from him. We'll be in touch. I stood up as well and let her lead me out of the clinic and toward her car. Is that good enough news? She asked, smiling softly at me. On impulse, I put my arms around her and pulled her to me. Thank you, I said, burying my face in her hair. And then I realized what I'd done. I instantly let go of her and stepped back. I'm sorry, I said. Gary, she said softly. It's okay. We got into her car. One more stop and then back to the office, she said. Over the years that Caroline had worked for him, I'd been to Bill Wainwright's house several times. He and his wife Stephanie lived in a nice neighborhood outside of town. It was a gated neighborhood. They held corporate events here. Why? I asked. Michelle just got out of the car and walked to the door of the house. I followed her. She didn't even have to knock. Stephanie had already informed the security guard letting us into the property that we were coming and was standing at the door waiting for us. Gary, she greeted. You must be Michelle, his secretary. Are you the one who called? Yes, that's her, Michelle replied. Come on in, Stephanie said. She led us into an office-like room just off the hallway. I had never been in this room before. Judging from the pictures on the desk and wall, it was Bill's office, but she sat down at the desk and pointed to the chairs at the other end of the hallway. She seemed to decide this wasn't a personal call. What can I do for you? Stephanie asked, looking at me. I sat there staring at her, unable to speak. Did you know? I asked finally. Stephanie sighed sadly. No, she said. I suspected, but I never found out. I could never find any proof, nothing I could take to a lawyer, or I would have taken every last penny from that bastard. Get in line, Michelle growled. Do you have proof? Stephanie asked, and I nodded. Proof that none of my children are mine, that they have the same father. The video of him and Caroline at my house, where my son calls him Da. I couldn't finish the sentence. A lump threatened to choke me, and I was lost again. Oh, Gary, I'm so sorry, she said. I've suspected him and Caroline for a long time, but he was so careful. I kept tabs on him, checking his phone, his email. I even challenged him, but he managed to convince me I was just paranoid. The private investigator I hired found nothing. Honestly, if I was sure, if I had proof, I would have come to you right away. But I couldn't destroy a seemingly happy marriage based on mere suspicion. I needed to be sure, and I never found proof. What are you going to do? I wondered if I should tell my plans to my enemy's wife. I didn't realize she wouldn't tell him everything once he got home. Maybe it was too late for him to undertake anything meaningful, but I wanted this to come as much of a shock to him as it did to me. The question is, what are you going to do? I asked. Now you have proof. She smiled slightly. I understand, she said. And I don't blame you. I wouldn't have told you either. If you have the name of a good divorce lawyer, I'd appreciate it. Michelle pulled a business card out of her purse and held it out to her. Thank you, she said. Will a week be enough time? I nodded. Great, she said. I'll get in touch with... She held out a business card and coordinate with her. She stood up. Apparently, our meeting was over. Michelle and I stood up. Stephanie came over and gave me a brief hug, kissing my cheek. I'm sorry again, she said. Look after him. She turned to Michelle, who flinched as she hugged me. He deserves better than what that bitch did to him. We went back to the office, and I spent the rest of the day finishing up the things I had to do while I was in Portland. At the end of the day, I came home. Michelle knocked on my door at her usual time, peeked in, and said she was leaving for the evening. She was back to being the professional she had always been. This too caused me to feel a sense of loss. I felt like I was starting to grow closer to her, but I guess that was just my imagination. I said goodnight, thanking her for her help. I was up late at the office. I had a lot of catching up to do. What time will you be home? Caroline's text came in around 8. Maybe another hour or two. I've got some catching up to do after my trip. I'm probably asleep by now. I have to get up early. Love you, Kexi Kex. Once again, I couldn't bring myself to reply to this message. I continued working until almost 11 o'clock. I really wanted her to be asleep when I got home. The less I had to talk to her, the better I would feel. When I got home, the house was in semi-darkness. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I looked in on Sonia and James. They were both asleep and looking as adorable as ever. I felt a sob start in my chest and I had to hide in the bathroom. I couldn't let Caroline catch me crying over babies that weren't even mine. I still hadn't decided what to do about the kids. It was unlikely any of them would remember me if I just walked away from them. I had no responsibility to them, but I still loved them both. How could I abandon them when less than 48 hours ago, they were my children, my flesh and blood, my pride and joy? And now they were further proof of my whore wife's infidelity. I decided to wait and see what would happen. In any case, the decision might not be made in my favor. I went to bed trying not to wake Caroline. It took me forever to fall asleep, and when the alarm clock woke me up in the morning, Caroline was already gone. When I walked in, Nanny was in the kitchen feeding the kids. I looked at her. She had to know. There was no way she didn't. Was she still looking at me now and laughing at the stupid jerk who couldn't even satisfy his wife? Did she know the kids weren't even mine? Had she taken the kids to say goodnight to Daddy Bill, as she often did to me? A vision of her and Caroline having a threesome with Bill Wainwright and the kids crying in the next room flashed through my mind. I shook my head angrily. She knew, I decided, and on Monday, I would take great pleasure in firing her. I'm going to make sure that little bitch never works as a caregiver again. I'm going to tell the agency, wait, what am I doing? I was taking my anger out on someone who had little hope of doing the right thing in this situation. Damned if you do and damned if you don't. If she had told me, she would have lost her job. She could leave, I reasoned, but then she seemed to have developed feelings for our children, whom she'd been looking after since Sonia was born. I was furious, but probably at the wrong person. I headed off to work. When I arrived, Michelle was already in the office. It was as if the previous 2 days had never happened. She was all business, although I noted in my day planner that she had set aside a day for what she called marketing. I settled into my office and she brought me my morning coffee, as she had done every day for all 9 years of working for me. Then she sat down on the other side of the desk. Only then did I notice that she brought coffee for herself as well. She'd never done that before. Marketing? I asked. Since when do I do marketing? She grinned. It was a pretty wicked grin, but for some reason it gave me a warm feeling inside. We need to make a plan, she said, the last part of Lorraine's strategy. I looked at her, not understanding. What? I asked. To tell everyone, Michelle said. Her friends, family, church groups, volunteers, everyone she comes in contact with needs to be told what a slut she is and what she's done. It won't present me in a good light, I said. I'll become a laughingstock. A cuckold who can't even satisfy his wife is raising other people's bastards. You have to tell your story, she said. If you don't, Caroline will, and believe me, she'll present you in a much worse light than the story of an unknown cuckold. What about an abusive husband? Or someone who abuses his children? People will believe this crap, and when we blow it up, she'll respond with everything she's got. Speak out first and people will be less likely to believe any counter-accusations. Some will believe it, of course, but there's nothing you can do about it. Michelle put together a media pack containing all the evidence we had of Caroline's infidelity. There was the private investigator's report, copies of the DNA report showing that I was not the father of my 2 children. There were copies of videotapes taken in my house, including the one showing James saying hello to Bill, and bedroom videos that I hadn't seen and didn't want to see. Later that morning, I received an email from Lorraine. It turned out that Stephanie had given her a sample of Bill's DNA. She matched it to my DNA test, and it turned out that he was definitely the father of both children. I paused. Children? Thought I, suddenly no longer thinking of them as his children. We included this new information in the packet and prepared it for shipment. They would be sent to Caroline's parents, my parents, Caroline's brother and sister with whom I was very close. Electronic copies will be sent to all her Facebook and LinkedIn contacts and anyone else I can send them to. The ones addressed to immediate family, I paid a courier to deliver them at 10 o'clock on Monday morning when the balloon was due to go up in the air. I just needed to get through the weekend. I had a plan for that as well. Since I'm an engineer, it took me less than an hour to design and assemble a small device. It had a motor, a timer, and a battery. I could set it up so that the motor would spin, creating a vibration at a certain interval. I came home Friday night, and when the au pair left, I hid the device under Sophie's pillow. It would go off at 6 in the morning, which is about the time we usually wake up. It would wake Sophie up, and therefore, our weekend morning sex would be eliminated. It went perfectly. I was woken up by Sophie walking into our room and climbing into bed with us. No sex then. I smiled to myself. I had managed to keep myself busy all day Saturday, doing all the housework Caroline had been demanding of me for months now. When she commented on it, I just said it was high time I got them done since she'd been nagging me for so long. Saturday night, when Caroline, oddly enough, tried to provoke me into sex, I pretended to be asleep when she came out of the bathroom, and on Sunday, her daughter came into her room again, pulled out of her sleep by my device. On Sunday, we decided to take the kids outdoors and spent the day at the zoo. Throughout the day, I looked at Caroline, the woman I loved, the woman I thought I loved, and the two children I had custody of, thinking of them as my own, several times and nearly broke down. I bit the inside of my cheek until it bled, trying to contain my emotions. But I made it through the whole weekend. On Monday, I was excited. I told Caroline I would be working from home. I wanted to talk to the au pair. Caroline left for work at her usual time, peeking into my office to let me know she was leaving. I pretended to be absorbed in my email and only hummed in response. I heard her car pull out of the garage and the door close. I looked at my watch, 8:15. An au pair knocked on my office door. She wanted to take the kids to the play center, but I said no, they should stay home. This surprised her. I had never turned her down before, but she just nodded and went back to the kids. I could hear James getting upset that he couldn't go, and he wanted to so badly. And just after 9 o'clock, Michelle pulled up to the house. I was surprised but let her in the house. For the first time since I'd known her, I made coffee for her. At 9:30, we had a teleconference with Lorraine. "Gary," Lorraine said, "this is your last chance to stop. I'm not saying you have to do it. I'm just saying that if you've had doubts over the weekend, now is the time to express them." "No," I said. "No doubts at all." "Then I'll see you on the other side," Lorraine said. And on it went. I kept an eye on my mailbox, waiting for the letters confirming the service to arrive. At exactly 10 a.m., the first one came. 3 minutes later, the second, and 5 minutes later, the third. And then my phone rang. It wasn't Caroline, as I thought, but my mom. "Gary," she opened it. "Hi, Mom," I said. "What's going on?" she asked. "Did you read the package I sent?" I asked. "Yes, but then you know as much as I do," I said. "Caroline cheated on me, probably my entire married life with her boss. The kids aren't mine. I'm divorcing that bitch." "Gary can't—" "No, Mom. Look, I have to go. I have other calls to make." I hung up. Just then it rang again. This time it was Caroline. "Gary," I didn't answer, expecting her to continue. "We need to talk," she continued. There was still no response. "I'm coming home." She cut the call short. "Caroline is on her way," I told Michelle. "I won't bother you," she said. I wanted to ask her to stay, but I didn't know how to do it. I just stared at her. "Call me," she said, "when you realize what's going on." And she left. Caroline arrived home about 20 minutes later. I heard her car pull into the driveway. She hadn't even bothered to pull into the garage. And I didn't know what to expect when she walked into the house. I didn't know if she'd walk in with a gun in her hand or slip in with her tail between her legs. Whatever the case, she walked into my office and sat across from me at my desk. "Gary," she began. "Not interested," I said, and interrupted her. "But, not interested," I said. "You don't even want to—" "No," I said. "I don't want to hear one damn word out of your mouth. You've been lying to me for 9 goddamn years. None of the kids are mine. But you convinced me to get a vasectomy while you yourself were on the pill so you could keep having fun with Daddy Bill." At that, her eyes widened. "So no, Caroline," I continued. "I'm not interested in what you have to say. My lawyer's card is in the packet you received when you were served with the subpoena. If you have anything you think I should know, talk to her." "What about the children?" she asked. "What about the kids?" I replied. "I don't have children, and if it were up to you, I would never have them." I would ask you why you did this to me, but I don't want to hear another lie. I really don't care about your excuses, justifications, and reasons. I just want this to be over so I can pick up what's left of my life and move on. I called the au pair into the room. I knew she could hear me because my office door was open and she was in the next room. You're fired, I said, effective today. Take your shit and shut up. What? She asked. Why? Because you covered for her, I said, pointing at Caroline. You knew she was having fun with her boss. I don't know if you knew the kids belonged to him and not me, but you definitely knew what was going on. I have video evidence of you talking to Bill about the kids. Get out. Gary, Caroline said, you can't fire her. I pay her salary. The au pair looked at Caroline with a look of gratitude in her eyes. Okay, I said. I've already contacted the agency and informed them that you were involved in an extramarital affair and agreed not to take any action against their company if they take you off the books. So if Caroline wants to keep you on staff, she'll not only have to pay you, but take care of everything else. Taxes, vacations, retirement, sickness, not to mention insurance. The assistant's face lost color. Not only was she losing her job, but she was taking herself off the agency's books. That would make it nearly impossible for her to find another household job. The agency representatives were talking among themselves. Now get out, I said, and she ran off. Did you have to do that? And Caroline asked. She didn't have to. You're talking again, I said. I told you I don't want to hear it. I want you to get your stuff and your kids and get out of my house. It's my house too, she said. Not according to the deed it isn't, I said. It's in my name only. So until a court finds otherwise, get the hell out. She jumped slightly when I called out to her. James walked into the room. Mommy, he said. Sonia fell. Caroline, with a stunned expression on her face and tears on her cheeks, stood up and walked over to her daughter. I closed my office door and stayed inside while she gathered her things. She returned a few minutes later, holding Sonia in her arms. You're going to say goodbye to... Don't say that, I said. She's not my daughter and he's not my son. Take them to Daddy Bill and let him take care of his offspring. They're none of my business. Gary, Get out. I heard the front door close, and a few minutes later her car started. She drove off. I let out the breath I had been holding for what seemed like an eternity. I was overwhelmed. I didn't hear the door open, and I jumped up as arms wrapped around me and I fell, resting my head on my hands. When I looked up, I saw that Michelle had her arms around me. She pulled me to her and hugged me while I sobbed. It took me a while to pull myself back together. I had just thrown away 9 years. My marriage, my children, my life was gone. I really didn't want to face the world anymore. Michelle took matters into her own hands again. Let's go, she said. Lorraine said it will take Caroline about 4 hours to get an emergency residence order. Since she has children and this is a matrimonial home, she'll be back. Do you really want to give her the pleasure of kicking you out of your own home? We packed my clothes and all the important documents. I had to decide where to stay, but I loaded my things into my car and Michelle's car and left. First, we went to the office where I was being served that afternoon. Lorraine called me and let me know she was expecting service. Not only was there a warrant to occupy the house, but there was also a restraining order which meant that I was not allowed to come within 100 yards of the house. If I wanted to take anything, I would have to make an appointment, and I would be accompanied by Caroline's attorney at my expense. Not realizing what was going on, I moved into Michelle's spare room. All my clothes were in the closet and all my papers were neatly stacked in the cabinets in the study. It had been a week since Caroline's pitch. I would work and then go back to her house with Michelle to eat and then sleep. In the morning, she would bring me coffee, make breakfast, and then we would head to the office together. Nothing seemed to have changed between us. She was still as businesslike as ever, and except for a hug when I broke down at my house on the first day, I never smiled at her. As it was, though, I had plenty to smile about. Monday morning, we had an appointment with the lawyers for the company Caroline and Bill worked for. I didn't know the details, but apparently we were suing for an amount the company couldn't afford. They had insurance, but it had a maximum of $1 million, and we were suing for well over that amount. Their lawyers behaved in a business-like manner. Lorraine, my lawyer, grinned like a Cheshire cat. What would it take, the lawyer asked, to get you to agree to this? Immediate dismissal with forfeiture of the seniority pension, Lorraine said. and a commitment to keep Caroline on the payroll for at least 3 years and 1.5 million. I didn't really listen as they exchanged phrases. In the end, they agreed to all of the above, but I would only get about $750,000. That would at least pay off some of my debt to the company's pension fund. All of that will be paid after the divorce is finalized, Lorraine said. They nodded. They understood. Lorraine stayed with us for the next meeting. It was a meeting with Bill Wainwright's attorneys. I walked out of their office $500,000 richer. I now had enough money to pay off my retirement fund loan in full and still have a small amount on hand. Or maybe I would after the divorce. The last meeting of the day was with Caroline's lawyers. Caroline was in the office with them, but didn't look at me when I walked in. Michelle was with me, as was Lorraine. This accounting in the divorce petition is ridiculous, Caroline's attorney began. Your client is the major shareholder and CEO of a company that is worth about $20 million at last estimate, not to mention assets in the form of a house, savings, and a 401k. I suggest, let me stop you right there, Lorraine said, pulling a stack of papers out of her briefcase. According to the prenuptial agreement signed by all parties, the company is not subject to division in a divorce. My client recently made a significant additional investment in the company that took most of his savings, his entire 401k, and a loan taken out against his house. He also had to take a loan from the company's retirement fund. One of the partners wanted to get rid of the company, and it was important to keep the stock from falling into the hands of a competitor who had already been trying to take over the business for several years. Because the loan from the pension fund means his salary has been reduced. He's now being paid less than your client, and I'll be asking the court for some sort of alimony agreement so he can hold out until he can find the strength. What about the children? Her attorney asked. There is DNA evidence that these children are not his, said Lorraine, that she intentionally falsified birth records to enroll my client as the father for the purpose of deception. In addition, as a separate matter, we are going to seek damages for a serious assault where she knowingly persuaded him to undergo surgical sterilization, which he agreed to, confident that he was the children's father. The alternative is for your client to sign the divorce petition as is, pack her belongings, and leave the matrimonial home in his hands. She will receive half of the joint account, the balance of which is currently $9,443.15. The lawyer looked at the papers at the prenup, and then at Caroline. For the first time, she looked at me. Gary, please, she said. 9 years, I said. 9 goddamn years. You've lied to me for 9 years, day in and day out. You have nothing to tell me that I want to hear. Caroline looked at her lawyer and nodded. She signed the papers. I wasn't around when she moved out of the house. I had just gotten a letter from her lawyers saying that the restraining order had been lifted and the house was now mine. I could move back into it anytime I want. I thought about it, but decided not to do it. Instead, I put the house up for sale. The amount didn't quite match what I owed the bank, but I reimbursed the difference and the bank walked away satisfied. 2 months passed, and I was still living in Michelle's spare room. After our divorce, Caroline moved in with her parents. Despite all the evidence I provided, they were firmly on her side and wouldn't talk to me. This was not a loss to me. For some reason, Stephanie didn't divorce Bill as she had promised. I didn't know why, nor did I want to find out. Because he lost his corporate job and his pension, they had to sell the house in the gated community and move into a small apartment. Bill still had connections and in-demand skills, so he managed to find acceptable work and was making a living, although not as much as he used to. I didn't know that he and Caroline were still dating. I hadn't seen her since that day at her lawyer's office and wasn't interested. I was sitting at my desk at work when Michelle knocked and, without waiting for an answer, walked into the room. Bill Wainwright is dead, she announced blandly. What? I replied. How? Apparently Stephanie caught him with Caroline again, she said. She shot him. I leaned back in my chair and a huge grin appeared on my face. I tried to pull it on, but I couldn't. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy, I finally said. Michelle laughed. Am I being rude? I asked. For getting excited about this? Not at all, said Michelle. That creep got what he deserved. By the way, this was just delivered. With an official look, she placed an envelope on my desk. I looked at it with trepidation. We both knew what was in it. I took it in my hands and opened it. This is it, I said. I'm a free man at last. Finally, Michelle said. Then she did what I least expected. She kissed me. It wasn't a peck on the cheek or even on the lips, but a full-on kiss with tongue, lips, and fingers. When she finally let me go, I leaned back in my chair panting, stunned and tense as the mainmast of a T-clipper. She giggled, looking down and noticing my obvious arousal. 9 years, she said. I've taken care of you. You're the most perfect man I've ever met. Not once have you even looked at me wrong, checked my legs or my ass, or felt me up. And I've loved you for it. I waited 9 years for you, and now you're free. I know you've always respected me, and that's a kind of love too. We're a great team. I know you as well as any wife knows her husband, and come to think of it, you know me just the same. And give me a chance to show you that not all women are lying, conniving bitches, please? I was stunned. I thought back to all the time I had spent with her before I found out about the affair. I thought about how I'd treated her. I had fervently defended her against my business partner, to the point of being kicked out of the business. That's when I realized that I had and still have real feelings for Michelle. I believed that it was impossible to work closely with someone for so long and not develop something in myself. While I was with Caroline, there was no need to explore those feelings, to evaluate them. But now, there was definitely such a need. Should I say something? She asked. A look of concern appeared on her face. For the first time, I saw uncertainty on her. How much? I asked. She looked puzzled. How much of what? She asked. Children, I said. How many children should we have? Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.